Welcome. Good morning. If y'all are on the East Coast, it might not be super early for y'all. Welcome. I'm so glad that you are all here. And thank you so much for having me. These medical student symposiums are such an exciting opportunity for you to get involved as a med student, to think about opportunities for residency, where you might want to go, and really just seeing all of the different ways that you can get involved on the state and national level through different organizations. Like she said, I'm Katie Wazinski. I'm the current RAAM RSA president. I am currently a P2I2 in Fort Worth, Texas. And yeah, I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of background about where we are in emergency medicine, tell you a little bit about our organization, and hopefully, if you haven't joined, this will compel you to join as a medical student. So let's jump right in. A little bit about the history of emergency medicine. If you are early on in med school, or a lot of students don't actually know this, that emergency medicine as a specialty is actually pretty new. And I would say we're in our like teen, adolescent, maybe college years if you think about all of the specialties within the house of medicine. Internal medicine has been around for like hundreds of years. Emergency medicine, our residency started in the 70s. Now, certainly people have been working in the ER for a lot longer than that. Prior to that, it was a lot of FM and internal medicine doctors who would work in the ER, and then they would admit their patients and work in the hospital, and they would work in many different places. And then in the 60s and 70s, people started to realize that emergency medicine was its own separate field. It had different mindsets and different things that you had to learn and know to work in the ER. And so the first residency started in the 70s, and really EM being recognized as a specialty wasn't until 1979. The first board exam, I'm sure you know that to become a doctor of any specialty, you have to not only pass your STEP and COMLEX exams, but you have to take your own specialized medical boards, and ABEM is our overall board exam. We have both oral and written boards, and that only started in the 80s. And so we talk a lot about the changes that are being made to our board exams. Again, relatively new of an exam. And amongst this, you still had a lot of doctors who were grandfathered into the specialty who became really upset that EM was becoming a specialty. There were a lot of lawsuits and there were a lot of unfair hiring and firing practices that were going on in the country. So you saw a lot of lawsuits against different folks in the space. And then in that sort of time frame, that's where AAM came in, because there were very unfair hiring, firing practices. It was not a great place and specialty to work in. And so AM really was founded on the idea that we are trying to protect our emergency medicine physicians, to one, protect them from unfair practices in the workplace, and two, ultimately protect the patients and advocate for patients to have emergency medicine trained specialists. So we were founded in 1993. Dr. James Keeney wrote this book that was aptly titled The Rape of Emergency Medicine, essentially saying that there were different companies that were corporatizing emergency medicine, and basically there was a lot of unfair business practices that existed in that time frame, again founded on protecting our physicians and therefore our medical students and trainees. RSA as an organization was actually founded a little bit later. So we were founded as a section in 1999 and then formed our own completely separate organization in 2005. We run separately from AAM as an organization. We can make our own decisions. We can say and do what we want to advocate for our medical students and residents. But typically our views line up very well with AAM in terms of the advocacy for state and national bills that we're advocating for, the different changes that are being made to emergency medicine. We're usually on the same page as AAM in that regard, and they support us in doing whatever we think is appropriate for our medical students and residents. I'm not going to belabor our mission, vision, and value statement, but again, we're the advocacy organization ultimately for our patients and therefore our medical students and residents. Here are a few of our values. and mission statement. Again, there are still these unfair practices, and you will see, especially in rural areas, people that are grandfathered in that are not emergency medicine trained and board certified. And in a lot of states, you don't, and a lot of hospitals, you don't have to be emergency medicine board certified. And so we are doing everything we can to advocate for the specialties in these changing times. So now a little bit more into RSA and the fun stuff, the benefits. So I do want to say that there are a lot of different organizations out there. There's UMRA, there's SAM RAMS, there's ACOEP, and I would say price-wise, we are very competitive in our pricing, not only for membership as a medical student, but also in terms of the benefits. We have our scientific assembly, our annual conference coming up, and for medical students, the registration fee is actually refundable. I'll get a little bit into that later, but we have such amazing benefits across the board. Things like MRAP you get for free as being an AAEM RSA member. Lots of discounts. EKG Weekly is really helpful. A lot of these are targeted towards residents, and your residency will pay for a lot of these, but definitely MRAP as a medical student is really helpful on your sub-Is. And then these are all different free podcasts, journals, things that we have published that are accessible to anyone and within our membership platform. And as a student, I would encourage you, if you have an interest, you are more than welcome to email me to talk to whoever, because if you have an idea of something you want to publish, get out there in a podcast space on print, we would love to talk to you and talk you through that idea. It is not only helpful to you as a CV builder, but we're always looking for new voices and new thoughts out there. These are really incredible publications that we've been working on just in the past few years. You get in your membership box a ultrasound guide. So that is great as a medical student, as an intern. This is the basics to ultrasound. We're actually in the process of working on an advanced ultrasound guide that's more targeted towards people looking to go into ultrasound fellowship. This scut sheet notepad, it just came out earlier in the year, and it is great for if any of y'all have used the notebook for like internal medicine, where it lays out like HPI, physical exams. This is essentially the same thing, but for emergency medicine. So great when you're on your sub-I, or even if you're an intern, to really organize your thoughts, come up with a plan, and have really stellar presentations to attendings. The critical care pocket guide. This is more ICU focused, so medical, surgical, really all of the basics. It hits the highlights on all things intensive care. And certainly you see lots of intensive care just in the emergency department. I hope that some of y'all are a part of the critical care course that's going on. I think it just started this month, and then it culminates at Scientific Assembly. This kind of goes alongside it, but anyone can buy it. Makes you look very smart, and so much knowledge in here when you're rotating through the ICU. We have lots of CME online, so you can access all of our past conferences, events coming up. We are here, the symposium. I think this is the last one of the year, so super exciting. And like I said, the intro to critical care, I believe the registration just closed at the end of January. If any of y'all are very interested in this, you can email me or Ashley. I'll put our emails in the chat and see if you can still join. You do have to pay for the course, but again, for the amount of learning and knowledge opportunity that it presents, the cost hopefully is not too crazy. So all of these subjects that you cover, from blood gases to how to manage a vent to ECMO, which not even a lot of residents see, fluid therapy, et cetera, et cetera. And then it culminates at Scientific Assembly, where you have a hands-on portion of the course as well. I took it. It was so helpful for my learning. You get a certificate of completion. So highly recommend. It's targeted towards third and fourth years, so students that can rotate in the ICU, and then interns as well. And then Scientific Assembly. So this is the most fun part of the year when we have our annual conference. It's April 11th through 15th. I believe the medical student section is actually April 10th and 11th. I need to double check that on the calendar, but it's pre-conference days. And there are so many things and so many new things that we're doing for medical students. We have it's called a Meet Your Match event where it's almost like speed dating, mingling with all of the residency programs that are there. That's happening on the Sunday. I think it's April 11th, right before Scientific Assembly officially kicks off. And at the end of the medical student sessions, you have lots of in-person networking opportunities. And again, like I said, registration is refundable for medical students. So highly recommend you come. If you would like to get more involved, we have an opportunity. I think that's the very last line. To be an ambassador for the Scientific Assembly Conference, you can apply. You get an additional few $100 refund to pay for your flight and come to the conference. And you have to do a little bit more work and helping our management team on the back end run things. But again, it's a really cool way to be involved. You actually get a mentor that you're paired with. So highly recommend you come and get involved at the in-person things. Health policy and EM symposium and advocacy day. So we have 2 days in June every year where we actually go to DC and we go to Capitol Hill and we talk to our state and local representatives about things that AAEM cares about. I know different organizations do this at different points, but it really is so important that as medical students and residents and doctors that we do this and show our face and actually advocate for ourselves in person, because you would be surprised at different organizations that are constantly in DC, constantly talking to legislators about their thoughts on healthcare that are not doctors and are not actually in the healthcare sphere. Obviously, we're very busy, but it's really important to show our face. We actually have a lobbying group that gives us a debrief, tells us what we should talk about, what words we should use, because we're not politicians. Like, I didn't know, but it's a really cool opportunity, especially if you're interested in health policy. So other leadership opportunities, board of directors and medical student council. The elections just closed. This position runs from April to April. So you will be hearing about your new board. If you are interested, the elections open November, December. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Hopefully you are an RSA member and we'll get emails about it. Cabinet of Delegates, this is a year-round position where you can join. So every medical school and residency can have their cabinet member and their delegate. So if you do not know or don't think that your medical school has a delegate, email me. We can confirm and you can be your delegate. We have quarterly meetings. We have different projects that are housed within the Cabinet of Delegates, a leadership opportunity where you can go back to your school and tell your school about RSA. We can give lectures to EMIGs, we can do school visits, we could do lots of things. So just a different opportunity to link your school with RSA. Different work groups. And like I said, being an ambassador for Scientific Assembly, the travel support is really clutch. This is how I got involved with RSA. I wanted to go to a conference and I was like, wow, you get a reimbursement for going to the conference. And so this was the first thing that I did with an RSA a few years back. And it's a really cool opportunity. You get a personalized mentor who is a faculty member, potentially a PD or APD at a residency program, and you connect with them and you have so many opportunities to talk to different residents and faculty. So highly recommend if you're interested. And our social media platforms. I'll keep this up for a second and I will put my email in the group chat. So feel free to email me. And if y'all have any questions about anything, I'll hang out for a little bit. It's such a great lineup. So you're going to have a fantastic day. I'm so glad that y'all are here. We have one question, someone raising their hand, Sydney.
Hi, yes. Sorry, I don't have my camera working, but I am at Ohio University and a third year student there. And I was just trying to get more information on the actual ambassador position because our school doesn't really have a huge connection with any of the EM programs, honestly. So this was me trying to get more information on it. So, what all should I just email you directly, or what all should we do to get information on being an ambassador? Because I am interested.
Yeah, do you mean an ambassador? So there's two different kind of opportunities. One is being an ambassador to the Scientific Assembly, the conference, and that's a more like limited leadership role where you are reimbursed for coming to the conference. You have different duties during the conference to actually help AAM RSA, and then a delegate, which I know these are all very fancy terms. It's potentially a year-long position if that's something you're interested in, where we have quarterly meetings and communicate with all of our delegates about what RSA is doing, different ways, different projects, things to get involved with. If you want to be a delegate for your school, just email me and we can make sure, that your school may or may not have a person, figure out the next steps with that and link you in with our RSA liaison, Ashley Allgood, who takes care of all things logistics. If you're interested in being a what's called ambassador to Scientific Assembly, I will put that link and make sure that applications are still open.
Okay, perfect. I would honestly like to look at both, so that'll be perfect.
Oh.
Thank you.
Yeah, and in terms of, I know a lot of schools might not have an automatic connection to an EM organization, whether or not your school even has an emergency medicine interest group or you have a leadership position in your EMIG that kind of connects with these groups. But I highly recommend if you're involved in your EMIG or thinking about developing one, feel free to reach out to me. We can always do, like I said, we can do virtual Zoom lectures with someone from the RSA board talking to y'all about how to get involved with emergency medicine, what you should be thinking of early on in med school to prepare yourself to apply to EM residency. We have so many different things we can absolutely connect and get something going.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Anything else before I cede my time and y'all can have a few minute break before your next speaker?
Thanks, Katie. I think there's a question in the chat asking about the process for the refund for Scientific Assembly.
Yes, I think when you register, it tells you the process, but you do have to pay a refundable rate when you are registering online, as long as you register before 3 days before the conference or something. And then when you do attend in person, they will process your refund. So it will just go back on however you paid.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Katie. I also cannot reiterate enough how awesome RSA is. I actually went to Scientific Assembly through my school, so I presented a poster. A lot of med schools also do this. If you present a poster, they'll pay for you to go or give you like a certain amount. So I was able to go and I went to the med student 2-day conference and it was awesome. I met so many wonderful people, colleagues, also people who are like mentors to me as well. And that's how I actually got involved in RSA and the position that I am now. So everyone's super nice when you go to conferences. I know it could be a little bit intimidating to go to conferences sometimes, especially if you're going by yourself, but there's so many different lineup of people, different interests, and you'll meet a ton of different people that can definitely help you in your journey to EM. It looks like Katie just dropped the link for the student ambassador for the Scientific Assembly below. Thank you so much, Katie. I hope it's warmer in Texas than it is on the East Coast. All right, next we're honored to have Dr. Calhoun. She's completed her residency at Temple University. She's a current Women's and Emergency Medicine Section Chair, and she's now practicing in the Philly area. Today she's going to be talking about burn bright, not out, taking care of yourself in a dumpster fire, an incredibly important topic as you navigate the challenges of training and being in the ED. We're so grateful to have her here and share her insight experience. Dr. Calhoun, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you whenever you are ready.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm going to wait back right up until about 9:30 to get started. So if anyone needs to get up, stretch, have a cup of coffee, take a quick break, let's do that now. If you are anything like me, one of the reasons why I got into this field is I am not a morning person, and this is pushing the boundaries of me being up in the morning. If I didn't have a puppy, I'd probably still be in bed. So let's stretch out the morning as much as possible.
And if anyone has any questions about anything, whether that's residency applications, RSA, going to conferences, I will put my email in the chat as well. And definitely feel free to email me with whatever questions you may have about anything. I will be going to the scientific assembly, so if you are going, I will definitely see you there.
Okay. And I will be there too, so you can catch me with any questions you have as well. But let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, can everyone see my screen? Okay. I appreciate the kind introduction earlier. But my name is Liz Calhoun. I am an attending physician. I work with a Democratic group now called ESA. We're based out of the Eastern Shore in Maryland and Delaware. This is an update from previous. I've spent the past 5.5 years as an attending working in Pennsylvania, and I start this week. So I'm really excited about my new position. And it would not have happened if I had not burned out. So let's get started. Why am I telling you about this now? You guys are all here at the beginning of your careers and you're very excited. And I do not want to do anything to diminish that. In fact, I want to do the opposite. Your whole careers are in front of you. And too often we really don't talk about the things that are important to us. And this is so important in our field that I want to make sure we're talking about it with you guys early and often so that none of you reach the point that I did. So today, just to give you a little overview, we're going to talk about exactly what makes EM docs burned out, how you can prevent that, and what you can do even as a medical student and a resident to help prevent yourself from getting to that point. And then we're going to talk a little bit about rankless match day, because I know that's on everyone's mind. And to me, that ties in a lot with burnout. If you make your rank list in just the right way, that's another step toward preventing the thing that we don't want to happen. So why am I personally giving this lecture? What's so special about me? I don't want you to go through where I've been. And let's talk about all the top traumas, the things that happened to me just in my training. Remember, I am more than 6 years out from residency. So we're a little bit in here, and these are just the things that happened first. So my mom died very abruptly after a very brief illness. And then my residency program closed. In that same year, we got hit with a global pandemic. After my mom died, I found out that I was the only person in my family who tested positive for one of the breast cancer genes. And when I was taking care of my mom I abandoned all of my belongings, and the management company at my apartment caused my place to flood, and I lost every worldly possession we had. And then when I was left to care for my dad, he developed many major health conditions and had 2 separate stomachs back to back when I was in residency. These are just the things that happened to me that I'm willing to talk about on a public forum. As you can see, this is beyond the normal stress of training and medical school, and everyone has their own individual stories. But these and many other things built to a head. In the winter of 2025, my best friend came to visit me. I was working as a nocturnist at the time, and I picked her up at the airport after I woke up after a long string of night shifts. She and I met when I was an intern. We were introduced by one of my other co-residents, and she and I instantly bonded. And so she became well adapted to dealing with all of the different vacancies of a residency program. And whenever something would happen, like I would have to sleep after a night shift, she would just hang out with my husband. And at the end of this weekend together, she looked at me and she said, "You are not okay. There is something really wrong with whatever is happening with you and your job and your life. Like, this is not you working night shifts. This is not you working too much. This is not just you being a nocturnist. You can't keep doing whatever you're doing. You weren't like this as a resident, and that was a much more stressful time in your life when you worked so much more." And it took months for me to go, okay, you're right. Like, there's something wrong. But that April, I took a 14-week leave of absence from work just to focus on my mental health. Before I left, I joked around with some of my colleagues, and I'm super stressed. Either I'm going to get divorced, or I'm going to like just buck out in the middle of a shift, or I'm going to end up 302'd, which in our state is the term for involuntarily committed. But I wasn't kidding. This is what was wrong with me. These are all the different things that went on my leave of absence paperwork. I was not okay. So how did I get here? And why am I not unique? Why am I not special? Why is this something that happens to more of us than we would really like to talk about? Let's start by talking about what burnout is. Burnout is a syndrome based on chronic, unmanaged workplace stress, characterized by emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced efficiency or personal accomplishment. Clearly, I had more going on than just burnout, but everything I had was triggered by burnout. It was triggered by my job. EM docs, we are constantly listed as the specialty most vulnerable to burnouts. Greater than half of us are noted as experiencing at any given time when we are surveyed. This is the 5 stages of burnout, and I really hope all of you are still in stage 1, this honeymoon phase, this enthusiasm, this love for the job. But stage 2, early on, we start to get the onset of stress, stagnation. Maybe you experience this a little bit in residency. We hope not. We want to not think about this, but this is when you start to be a little stressed out by your job. Stage 3, you're going to start to feel frustrated and start experiencing physiologic signs of distress. If you make it stage 4 and 5, you are clinically depressed and may be experiencing signs of self-neglect and isolation, particularly from your loved ones and other peers. So we get here for many reasons. Emotional exhaustion. My normal workday, your future normal workday, this is somebody else's worst day of their lives. For some people, it truly is, but if it's you, they might just be the fifth patient that you've diagnosed with cancer this week. Other people, they're going to chronically live in this worst day of their lives, in this chronic victim syndrome, and they're going to dump their stress onto you. The emergency room is both the physical and the emotional dumping grounds for so many different people and problems in society beyond the true medical emergencies that we're trained to deal with. We talk a lot about social EM. This is where it comes in. It's no longer a hidden part of our job. We are dealing with the major problems in society, like homelessness, poverty, undiagnosed and untreated mental health and substance use disorders. What might happen? Maybe a family member shows up to visit Pop for their yearly visit and they realize he now has dementia. Great, they're bringing him to the emergency room. Somebody gets arrested for drunken disorderly behavior. They might be brought to the ED just to make sure they're really intoxicated and to monitor them until they're sober. The days the drunk tanks are long gone. This happens over and over on top of our STEMIs and strokes and cardiac arrests. And then there's decision fatigue. Every decision that you will make as an emergency physician has weight, whether you realize it or not. Do you get a second troponin on the patient? Do you order a head CT? Do you admit the patient or do you discharge them? Do they need thrombolytics? Some choices aren't life or death, but some are. And we make thousands of decisions upon thousands in just a single shift. And then there's this constant fight instead of flight. We're always on, we're always activated. There's always someone or something to argue about, whether it's arguing with a CT tech about scanning a patient with a GFR below 30, or arguing with the hospitalist that this patient really needs admission, even if, they don't see it the same way that you do. You're going to argue with a cardiologist about bringing in the cath lab team in the middle of the night, even if they don't quite meet the OMI criteria, but you just know that they can't wait until morning to be cathed. Are you arguing with the patient and their family and talking about what you can and can't do in the ED? We're not doing full body MRIs, but they don't know that. You're always on, always. And then there is things like the corporate practice of medicine and corporate medicine. I'm going to prime you for Dr. Colucci's talk a lot during mine because it is so important now. But private equity in medicine is something that impacts all of our lives. Very few EM docs have professional autonomy. There's always going to be metrics to adhere to, non-evidence-based medicine to practice, no matter what we tell you. Things like a 30 cc per kilo bolus for everyone who meets Sears criteria for sepsis is not evidence-based medicine, but we do it anyway. And there's always more money, more things to be, blood to be squeezed out of a stone that lead us to do things that take away from true bedside patient care. What does all of this lead to? After the hospital closures and staffing shortages, we also get unsafe staffing ratios, closed units, decreased service line availability, which means maybe your hospital no longer has an OB surface or a GI on consult. And then hospitals close. Ask me about this. I know this all too well. Between 2022 and 2025 in the county where I worked for that time period, 4 out of 6 hospitals closed. It's happening. And then we get the great boarding crisis, and it leads to this. ED crowding is not an issue of inconvenience. This leads to significant patient harm, increased adverse events, preventable error, worse outcomes for patients who have prolonged boarding in the ED, higher costs of care, increased violence towards staff, high turnover, human error, legal action, physician burnout, and poor patient experience. And you know what, speaking of being sued, you're going to be. More than 75% of ED docs are sued at least once in their career. We practice in a highly litigious specialty with societal expectations of perfection, not humanism. Doesn't mean you're a bad doctor. It means you're human. And we practice in a society that does not like us to be human. It is unfortunately the reality of how we practice. Little trigger warning on my next slide for anyone if we're going to talk about ED violence for 30 seconds. So turn off your camera, turn off your screen if you don't want to see the next photo. It's not as graphic as I'm making it sound, but this is your trigger warning. Violence against healthcare workers is a real thing. More than 85% of ED docs have reported being assaulted in the past 5 years. That's more than proportion that get sued, more than that get burned out. And 2/3 have reported it in the past year. 1/4 have experienced it between once a week to once a month in the past year. This is a photo of me. Clearly, I'm a statistic. It's happened to me more than once, about once a year. As an aside, if this happens to you, please report this. Violence is never okay. There's too much dialogue around normalizing violence against healthcare workers. It's a felony everywhere. I'm not talking about the demented moms who are scared and terrified and don't know what's going on, but that patient that looks you in the eyes before they claw off your mask and spit in your face, please report them. Please, it protects all of us. And then the great stressor for all of us, COVID. It's changed medicine forever in ways that we can't even begin to quantify now. Whenever someone says what you were getting into when you went into medicine is not true, it is true for your generation. But COVID changed everything about the way that we practice medicine. It exposed the cracks in our system and exacerbated them to these absolutely cataclysmic proportions. It worsened our workplace shortage. And it politicized and mainstreamed mistrust in the US healthcare system and physicians in general. And we have not recovered from this. We may be past the pandemic, but we are not recovered from the cracks in the system that this exposed. So if you add in the physiologic stress of shift work, self-imposed perfectionism, and the increased risk of substance use disorder in emergency physicians compared with other specialties, and all of a sudden it becomes really obvious why our specialty continuously tops the list of burned out physicians. And then a little bit to talk about the elephant in the room, suicide. Women, I'm talking to you here. Female physicians are more likely to die by suicide than the general population. The opposite is actually true for men. There's a lot about our profession in the traditional patriarchal hierarchy of medicine that is protective for male physicians. However, that being said, you're still affected too. Proportionally, both male and female physicians have higher rates of death by suicide than other causes of death. So if you need help or know someone that does, please write down these phone numbers. 988 is our national suicide hotline, but more importantly, the physician support line. I wish it was open 24/7, but this is staffed by volunteer physicians for physicians and medical students exclusively to help with anything that you have going on. Please reach out. If you have any personal concerns, my contact email is going to be at the end of the talk, and please reach out to me too. Our jobs are hard. You're not alone. We're all here for you. We're all here for you early. So one last very depressing statistic to close out a little introduction to burnout, 43.7. If you haven't heard of this number before, then you haven't read the research on burnout in physicians. This is the average age of attrition for female emergency physicians. We leave the workforce approximately 12 years sooner than men, often less than 10 years post-residency. Men make it to about 55 in our specialty, which is still sooner than every other specialty, but women leave earlier and faster because of burnout. Again, men, this is still important for you. I am not discounting that at all, but there's something inherent about your natural resiliency, and we need to embrace that and learn from that, but also focus on the fact that none of us are okay. This number is why I still say I am enduring burnout recovery. I'm not a survivor. I am less than 10 years post-residency. I am not yet 43. And some days I see the end of my career coming on like a freight train, and some days I see it stretching out in front of me. And my goal is to keep it stretching out as front of me as long as I can. So now that we talked about what burnout is, let's talk about what doesn't work. And I'm sorry in advance, you've probably already had to endure this, and you most definitely will as a resident. But your hospital administration is going to make you believe that yoga, wellness lectures, and pizza parties are going to help. They don't. Yoga might. It's not a blanket solution for everyone. But sitting in a lecture on wellness when you really just need a day off is not going to help. Nor is telling you to think positive thoughts or drink 64 ounces of water or getting 8 hours of sleep. All of those things make me want to tear my hair out. We fight the Grim Reaper on a daily basis. We're all going to be a little bit cynical. And JACO and the regulations make us difficult to eat and drink on shift. And let's be face it, we're really slamming in between patients anyway because we're too busy to sit down and take a 30-minute meal break, just like everyone else. And sleep hygiene is important, but part of that is getting consistent 8 hours of sleep at night and going to bed at the same time every single day. And we make weekly sacrifices to the circadian gods. So none of that works for us. How can we really take care of ourselves? So start by taking some time for yourself. This is going to look really different for everyone. Maybe it is yoga. Maybe it's reading a good book. It could be baking or biking or playing video games or extreme sports, rock climbing. You tell me. Whatever it is, do it for 30 minutes a day. It's literally 2% of your day. Do not tell me that you do not have the time to do this. 30 minutes a day is non-negotiable. You are the most important person in the room. If you are not there, you do not show up and you're not taking care of myself, you will not be able to do your job adequately. There is no excuse for not taking those 30 minutes. Anecdotally, I actually started doing this in medical school. I started my day by not getting up and going to class, but staying on the couch with a cup of coffee and a book. And guess what? My grades went up. My dean might not have been too happy with me, but my grades went up. So randomized controlled trials have also shown that taking this 30 minutes for yourself helps with burnout, self-compassion, and imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is something that I'm sure you're already feeling as a medical student. It's when it hits hard, and it's going to hit hard again in residency. It's going to hit hard again as an attending. So this is something small that you can do that will make a huge impact. And when you're feeling down and out, if this lecture is making you feel a little down and out, start thinking about getting therapy. Start early. Don't wait until you hit stage 5 of burnout. There's been studies that show that EM physicians experience PTSD at a rate just shy of soldiers who have returned from active duty war zones. Our job's dependent on suppressing trauma. But if that continues to be suppressed outside of work, you are going to become buried under the weight of it. You will. I guarantee it. So, little unsolicited advice here. If you're seeking out a therapist for the first time, consider seeing a physician and not an LMFT or an MAT or a Psych D. This is just personally, but I found that when my troubles are work related, I found it easier to unload on somebody who I don't have to explain duty hours or golden weekends or program directors to. Your mileage may vary, but if we're talking about troubles of medical school, residency, and the job, there's nothing like talking to someone who's had to work that 24-hour shift themselves. And there's so much stigma that has surrounded mental health care in physicians. Pardon me for just a second. And I apologize. My puppy is becoming detrimental to my mental health. So I'm going to take a 30-second pause here. Highly recommend a 30-second pause when you are feeling overwhelmed about things. Do it on shift. It's okay. Nothing's going to happen in those 30 seconds. I promise. And if something does, maybe it's okay that I got interrupted. Something really big. But back to mental health care. There's a lot of stigma about things. I'm here to tell you that part of the stigma that you hear is true, but part of it's also a myth. We're working to really stop the stigma around physicians and medical students seeking help for their mental health. If you've heard the phrase stop the stigma before, it's probably because of the Lorna Breen Foundation. Dr. Breen, she was an emergency physician who died by suicide at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic. In her memory, her family, friends, and colleagues have been working to raise awareness and enact change surrounding burnout, suicide, and mental health treatment. There's a QR code here with a link to the foundation's website, some of the legislation that it's enacted, and how different health systems around the country have been enacting the recommendations that they've made. One of the reasons that we've cited as a specialty and as a profession to be so reluctant to seek help goes like beyond stigma, but fear of difficulty for licensure if we disclose issues with substance health or mental health issues. In 2018, the Federation for State Medical Boards issued 4 recommendations for state boards to be compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Mental health and substance use issues are a protected disability. They are. So these 4 recommendations were put out there to promote physician well-being. These are: ask only if the physician is impaired. Ask only if they are currently impaired. Allow for safe haven reporting, meaning no consequences for the physician to self-report, and include supportive language that normalizes self-reporting, seeking help, and physician wellness. In 2025, I actually began an ongoing project building off the FSMB recommendations. It's pending publication, so I'm not going to share it publicly, but I can tell you that from my research, the vast majority of the states, and all of them in the Northeast, follow some, if not all, of the FSMB recommendations and are safe to disclose to. This here is a link to the AMA's original research regarding the topic. You can investigate it yourself if you have specific concerns, or if you have questions about the regulations in a particular state that you are interested in practicing in at some point, please reach out to me and I'm happy to share what I have with you. So what else? Set yourself up for success. This is when we start talking about happier things, I promise. One of our deans gave us this advice when we started medical school, and I still found it to be true all throughout medical school, residency, and attendinghood. Automate everything that you can. Put everything on autopay. Everything. Meal prep like crazy. Schedule deliveries of things that you use regularly, coffee pods, toilet paper, whatever it is. Decide what's worth it to you to have your time saved. What is there a effective cost benefit ratio for? Not only is fatigue real, but decision fatigue is real, and it happens outside of work too. One day you're going to get home and you might get into a fight with your significant other because they had the audacity to ask you if you wanted Indian food or pizza for dinner, and you just couldn't make one more decision that day, and you completely melted down. It's definitely never happened to me before, or anyone else that I know. This is unfortunately something that will happen to you more than once. The more you can take off your future use plate, the more time you're going to have when you get home, get off shift, to just relax and enjoy. Do everything you can to set yourself up for success. And so then indulge in convenience. This is going to mean different things to everyone. Again, not saying go crazy or spend outside your means, but find things that have value. Everything that has value and bring improvements to your life will help with your mental health. This may mean pre-made meals. It may be in your laundry or a dedicated parking spot, which, by the way, is still the best birthday present I have ever gotten. Maybe it's a stellar gym in your apartment. Whenever it is, there's benefit to investing in things that make your life easier so you can spend more time being you. And exercise. This is where the yoga comes in. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, don't do it. Do whatever works. If you prefer to run or lift or bike, do that instead. And start now. It's a myth that it only takes 21 days to form a habit. It's a lie. It takes 3 to 6 months or longer. And exercise in any form is one of the best things you can do for your mental health. Starting things now is going to make a huge improvement before you start your intern year. If you thought like the freshman 15 in college was bad or that was a myth, until you get to intern 15 and you experience cold break room pizza, leftover bags of chips, and the ice cream cake that somebody brought in at 2 a.m. for somebody's birthday. Unhealthy habits are really easy to indulge in residency. Be aware and position yourself to avoid them. Just say no. No is a complete sentence. Now, I really don't advise this saying to your program director when they ask you to cover a shift for a sick co-resident, or that's happening when they ask you to go and see a sick patient right now. However, there's a phenomenon that happens to both residents and new attendings and even medical students. They get in the habit of saying yes to too many things, both to please or impress their superiors, explore new parts of the field. And you have to say yes to some things. But for others, I ask myself these 4 questions. Does this benefit my future career? Am I being paid extra or otherwise compensated to do it? Is it a requirement? And does it bring me joy? Now note the asterisk. Some things you aren't going to be compensated for as a resident. It's to be expected. As an attending, different story. But ask yourself these questions. And then give yourself grace for skipping your second cousin's birthday party, even if you're off that day. Tell your mom I said it was okay. It's really okay. Or politely decline a second research project. You have to do one as a resident, but you don't have to do 2. You can always ask them to circle back later when you may have more bandwidth. You're not going to please everyone. That includes your program directors, your co-residents, the department chair. Please stop trying. Don't try so hard. We will get you there, but you don't have to please every single person and say yes to every single thing you are asked to do. Find it confident. This is different than therapy. You really can't keep it all inside forever. Sometimes you need to get home after a bad shift or a good shift. Scream, cry, yell, vent, whatever it is. And you need to talk to someone. Fortunately, these days, the pit is helping us explain what our lives are like to our non-medical colleagues. But even if they don't get it, just having someone to use as a sounding board is so important. Talk, journal, vent, cry. Just don't keep it inside. Keeping it inside is how it builds up over time until it explodes in the most inopportune of ways. The dog. Right now, I currently don't recommend this as my puppy is screaming and crying in a crate. And this is most certainly easier said than done in residency, particularly if you're solo. Ask me sometime about how brilliant it was to get a puppy the month my residency program closed. And adopting any pet is something that needs to be done with great consideration because you are responsible for another being's life and happiness. However, pets are shown to help with stress, anxiety, loneliness, and mindfulness. My dogs make sure I get up in the morning. They make sure I get exercise in every single day. And they're always so happy to see me when I get home that they instantly put me in a better mood. Spend time with little furry creatures when you can and where you can. I want you to keep up with your hobbies, whatever they are. There's a reason why we ask you about what you do for fun. There's a reason why our specialty is not driven towards people who have 17 first author peer review publications before they get to their M4 year. Not us. We want you to have a good work-life balance. All of the travel photos here are mine, and most of them are actually from residency. We don't want you to forget about your hobbies in residency, even with time constraints. Plan in advance and plan vacations, schedule a class. Do not let your individuality be lost. It is really easy to forget, again, to schedule these things for yourself. 30 minutes, an hour if you can do it, but make sure you are keeping up with them. They will keep your head above water. And develop your good habits early, more than just exercise. One of these good habits is charting and keeping your work life at work and your home life at home. With few exceptions, there are some places that do overlap. 8+1 shifts where you're given an hour's overlap to stay and chart. Most of the time, you're not being paid to stay late to do it. I used to take home 5, 6, 10 hours worth of charting every week. I didn't get paid for it. I didn't get paid for it as an attending. I rarely do, unless I get behind due to an extraordinary patient. There's always going to be somebody else to see. There's always going to be a full waiting room. We're well beyond the days of clearing the board early and getting out on time, taking naps on overnight shifts. What you need to do is see the sick ones first, and then see the ones when you can, who you can, and do your best to keep a balance. If you start these habits early, you will carry them through as an attending. If you do not start them in residency, you will carry those bad habits through as an attending, and they're very hard to break. And then lastly, give yourself grace. You're human. You're going to make mistakes as a student, as a resident, as a fellow, as an attending, as a human being. There was a 1990 report to RSA which attributed many medical deaths due to systematic issues above the level of individual physicians, and it really raised the awareness of deaths due to medical errors. However, unfortunately, fixing the systematic issues really hasn't happened to you on the scale it needs to, and this study didn't take into account that human error exists. We are imperfect beings, or malpractice system would like us not to be, but we are. And the best we can do is learn from them. Before we had the pit, we had scrubs, and that used to be the most realistic medical show of our time. As Dr. Cox said, you're going to screw up, but having a healthy amount of fear about screwing up is good. You just can't let it paralyze you. It will make you a better doctor if you let it. Now, a little aside here, I'd be remiss if I didn't quickly mention coaching, which is beyond the scope of this talk, as it is a burnout technique used in many different fields, including, but not limited to, medicine. Given that it is time and money, it costs time, it costs money, and it costs a lot of personal investment that is well beyond just a basic level of burnout prevention. I won't get into too much detail, but know that if you find yourself going down this path, burnout has been proven by randomized controlled trials to help you get back to your normal baseline. And then lastly, be comfortable with not being okay. Things are going to happen. You're going to have bad days. You are going to be stressed. Our jobs are stressful. You're going to hide in a supply closet, hopefully not during your first code. You're going to cry at an opportune time, all of you. You're going to be hit really hard by a patient who's died, and you're going to wonder if you can get out of bed the next day. Part of our jobs is teaching ourselves not to be affected by every single patient that we see. No other specialty really has to pick themselves back up after a death or a sick patient and move on. Nothing has happened, but it did. And the day that you stop feeling something for any of your patients is the day you've headed down this path towards burnout and losing your humanity. Don't let it happen to you. Get comfortable with not being okay and learning to reach out for help when you need it. Reach out early, reach out often. So now we are going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the match. I'm not going to go over any specifics about programs, how to input your rank list, things like that. I know there's going to be a breakout session on that later, and this is far beyond my non-academic mindset. A little bit about my background. I am a non-academic physician by trade. I've always worked in a community setting. However, over the past 5 years, I've worked with medical students and residents at all different levels. And that's how I got into lecturing, in addition to my involvement with AAEM and RSA since I was a resident of my own. So, a little story about why I'm the person talking to you about Match. I'm one of a very few select group of unlucky people that had to endure applying and interviewing for residency twice. In July of 2019, my residency program, which happened at the time to be the second oldest in the country, shut down somewhat abruptly. We had a little less than a month's notice. Fortunately, I was training in Philadelphia where there was not a dearth of programs, and I was able to finish my program uninterrupted timeline-wise. My entire class was. We were very fortunate. But that also means that I'm one of only a handful of people in the country that trained at multiple programs from my original rank list. So I hope that you will consider my unique perspective on things when considering the rank list, given that I've had the opportunity to see my own list from different perspectives. This photo was taken from Monday of my original match week. Clearly, I handled the stress well. Do as I say, not as I do, right? Once upon a time, there had yet to be an explosion of programs, both due to the slot expansion and the AOA-ACG merger. Therefore, I had ranked 15 programs, which was the number necessary to guarantee to ranked match. We had a 99.7 fill rate that year. I will never forget being called up onto that stage. We had to open our envelopes individually. It was painful. It was in person. And before we all went up there, he said, "You match where you are meant to be." And so after match day, I moved to Philadelphia. And 2 years later, one of the oldest safety nets in the hospital, Hahnemann University Hospital, closed its doors. What pounded the final nail into the coffin of Hahnemann? Private equity. Have I done enough to hype up Dr. Colucci yet? I hope so. So if you think this stuff doesn't matter when you are a resident, it does. Think again. This happened to Philadelphia twice. 2 residency programs closed in 6 years due to private equity. It's important. Learn it now. Take a stand now. But I digress. So when we should have been looking for jobs, I was rematching instead. We had a secondary match day, and I was fortunate enough to rematch in Philadelphia and finish my training with a co-resident by my side. I really hadn't learned to cope with my stress any better yet, though. So, as you heard, I spent almost an entire academic year at Temple. Granted, it was literally up the street, like literally up the street from Hahnemann. And though our patient populations were similar, and many of the attendings were actually MCP Hahnemann grads themselves, again, second oldest program in the country, the programs were dissimilar in many ways. I cannot tell you how grateful I am for the opportunity to train at both places and to learn from dozens and dozens of mentors and have not one, but 2 residency families. But here's what I can share. You will get good training anywhere, almost, little asterisk. asterisk to the hastily thrown together programs backed by private equity groups that have poor AAEM pass rates. If you're not sensing a theme yet, again, lead into Dr. Colucci, but I digress. If you had compared the rankings, though, of Drexel and Temple on SDN or US World News or wherever else you're looking for official program rankings, they would have been miles apart. But I never felt behind or inferior to my co-residents who trained all 3 years at Temple. My co-resident didn't either. And we were never treated any differently. There was no remediation. There was nothing that we couldn't do or weren't expected to do. We felt on the same par. And again, after Crozier closed, I worked with some of their former residents who joined programs in the Philly area where I was attending. And if I hadn't known that they were former Crozier residents from the embroidered scrubs that they were wearing, I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between them and their co-residents who'd been at the same program for multiple years. Now, certainly, this is not going to take away certain nuances much. For example, if you're interested in pursuing an EMS fellowship, yes, a program with a robust EMS curriculum and or a fellowship program there is probably going to be a little bit better for you. But if you're comparing how many thoracotomies each program is doing, I'm here to tell you, you are wasting your time. You will get the training that you need. So be yourself. We are one of the most liberal specialties. And that being said, some programs may be a better fit for you based on your appearance, lifestyle, or personal goals. So, for example, things like family planning, FMLA leave, breast or chest feeding support, these are things to consider. Also, things like driving distance between sites. If you don't want to own a car, don't pick a program that has a community rotation that is 45 minutes away. Conversely, if you hate the idea of population density, don't apply to programs in New York City. They will not make you happy, no matter what you think of the program or the prestige or the opportunities they have to offer. Be yourself. If you're not a city person, don't force it. So find your people. Back in my day, really not dating myself here or anything, we used to have 100% in-person interviews, and we used to have interview socials where you could bring a +1. My husband and I were long distance at that point, and he came to as many socials as he could so we could explore the different cities and we could figure out where we wanted to be together. After one of them, he watched the chief resident kind of waltz in late. She had her hair all wet and hastily thrown together in the middle of winter. And he just laughed when he looked at her and he's like, that could be you. Like, these are your people. You would totally do something like that. He wasn't wrong. They were my people. They're still the people I text you up at 3 a.m. when I need advice or support, whether or not I'm on shift. They're the people that I have spent the past almost decade of my life leaning on. And as a corollary, are the residents happy? I remember interviewing at a program where the residents told me that their wellness days consisted of working 8-hour shifts once a month instead of 12s so they could run their errands and go to appointments. They weren't happy. I wasn't happy hearing that. If the residents are happy, chances are they're going to get the needed support and structure from their program director, from hospital administration, from support staff, and you will too. Their measurement of happy should be your measurement of happy. And then speaking of 12s, I don't want to let that dissuade you from a program that you otherwise love. I'm a really big advocate of working all manner of shifts in residency. The last thing you want to do is to sign a contract to work 10, 12s a month as a new attending if you've only worked 8 hours as a resident. And then you're going to find out that you hate it. Residency is a time to push yourself when you have a safety net. Also, other things that don't matter, things like perks, helpful extras. Does the hospital have a fancy coffee shop or a nice scrub budget? Chalk those up to nice but not necessary. Don't let flashy perks talk you out of an otherwise good fit. No food budget, no custom fix scrubs. None of that is going to make up for having supportive core faculty and co-residents that you can already envision yourself being friends with. At the end of the day, medicine is about support. When you're making your rank list, the most important thing is to find a supportive place where you feel like you're a good fit. It doesn't matter if it's 3 years or 4 years, no matter what changes are to come. I want you to surround yourself with the people that matter. If that means staying close to home so you have family support, great. If that means venturing out to a new place where you feel like you already fit in from day one with the residents and the attendings, great. That's where you need to be. The knowledge, the training, the skills, they're all going to come, whether you're in an academic powerhouse or a small community program. Remember, going back to the beginning of my talk, stage 2 of burnout is when you move past that honeymoon phase and enter the stressful period. Your goal should be to stay in stage 1 all throughout residency and beyond. But unless you develop a really good support system to keep you grounded and happy, you're going to find that the path to burnout is a much quicker one than you expect. All right. Any questions for me?
For people that are looking at our third or fourth years, how do you see if residency programs are owned by those private equity companies, and like what are some red flags you should look out for corporately?
So you should look at who the hospital is owned by, and then things that, if that's not always obvious, you can ask who the attendings are employed by. So if the attendings are employed by a large private equity group like USACs or the hospitals and by HCA, I'm calling these out by name, but there's clearly more. Those are big red flags. Other things are low ABEM pass rates. Now, granted, if you've been following the ABEM trends, you'll see that the pass rates have slightly gone down over the past few years, but you should still be seeing pass rates for each program that are equivalent with a national average, somewhere around 90% first time pass rate. If you're seeing pass rates in the 50s, ask yourself why. Why are they passing so low? Another red flag that you can look out for is where are the residents going when they are done? Happy programs are going to keep some people on. People are going to stay locally. If people are having a hard time getting the fellowships that they want or having a hard time finding a job in a place that they want, that's another big red flag. But start off by who the hospital is paid for. And another trick is to ask the programs, are you going to be PSLF eligible? Because if the hospital is for profit and they employ you, you will not be eligible for PSLF. And that is your first red flag that the hospital is for profit and there's more going on here than meets the eye.
Perfect. And what's some of your like big green flags, like looking for programs? I know a bunch of students on here are third years and they're looking to like secure sub-Is. It's like it's coming to that season. So what are some things that students should be able to look for that are super healthy in residency programs and PDs?
Ask what their residents are doing for fun and how often they spend time together after shift. One of the big green flags from Drexel for me was that there was always somebody to hang out with after shift. Now, granted, there are some people that are home buddies, and there most certainly was in my program too. But if I had a bad shift and I needed to go out and vent a little bit, we had a group chat, and there was always somebody who was willing to lend an ear. Are your residents willing to spend time with each other outside of the mandated amount of time together? Are they getting time off to take care of the things that they need to do? Are they feeling rested and recharged after a couple of days off? Or are they coming back and saying, I didn't do anything on my days off by sleep? Just because we have less duty hours than every other specialty doesn't mean that you're not going to come back and feel burned out after the end of a long stretch of shifts. Your program should have something in place to help you rest and recharge. And they should be willing to talk about what they do to help you with that.
Exactly. Thank you so much for your talk. Does anyone else have any questions for Dr. Calhoun? And I can't reiterate her speech enough in her presentation because looking for programs and being in the process of the February month we're ranking and everything and going through a whole bunch of interviews, it's very important to see what you like and what you don't like, and also doing sub-Is and going in there and experiencing every single program. You see what you like, what you don't like, and see like those red flags you're talking about. Because I've been on interviews a bunch of times that they say all these green flag things, and then you go for a second look and you're like, you know what, these aren't my people. And that's exactly what you have to look for. And I think the most important thing that Dr. Calhoun was talking about was like building these healthy habits. Third year, you're busy, you're rotating through a whole bunch of different specialties, your time is chopped in half. But fourth year, you get a little bit more freedom and you have this ability to build habits. And one of the things that I'm doing personally is making sure that everyone takes time to build those healthy habits, working on the meal prep, working on things that make me who I am, finding those hobbies that when I come home from a 12-hour shift, I'm able to sit down and do that and take my mind away from residency. So I cannot reiterate enough. And thank you so much, Dr. Calhoun, for that wonderful speech.
One last note on red flags. If something feels off to you, it probably is, and you need to trust your gut. I rotated at a program that shall remain nameless when I was a fourth year, and I got sick during my rotation. And I showed up to shift, and I was sick and shouldn't have been working. We are conditioned to work with fevers and work with banana bags hanging attached to us. Don't do any of those things. Please find a program that will let you call in sick when you are having a fever. You shouldn't be around patients. I showed up to my shift and I worked through it. And they didn't send me home because they told me that they didn't think that I could make up my shift after because I was a visiting student. My in laws lived 50 feet from the hospital entrance, not an exaggeration. Could have made it up at any time. And then I got a bad slowy because of how sick I was on that shift. And they said I wasn't performing up to my potential. That's how they treated one of their visiting students they're trying to impress. How are they treating their residents? And so if something doesn't feel right to you, it's not right. They were a DNR for me, and that was very easy. It's okay not to rank programs that you interview at. If you'd rather go and match than be there, don't rank them. But hopefully that will happen to none of you, and you are going to find all the programs with the green flags and match at the place that makes you just as happy as I was. And I wish you all the very best of luck. Please reach out to me with any individual questions. I'm happy to talk about anything that may come up for you.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on your new position.
Thank you. And yes, Dr. Kluche, it is totally okay to make your rank list on vibes. Trust your gut. That's, I think, what we both did. And I'm not going to speak for Dr. Colucci, but I was so happy that I went with the vibes. My vibes were right by a lot.
Thanks so much. So next, we're excited to introduce Dr. Colucci. She's a current AAEM RSA at large director. She completed both her EMS and EM residency at Yale University. Today, she's going to be picking back on Dr. Calhoun's topic about the fight against corporate practice in medicine and why it's so important in our field and like the physician training and what you should be looking for. We're so grateful to have her here. Dr. Colucci, whenever you are ready, if you're not ready, you can take as much time as you need. I know we're a little bit ahead schedule.
It's up to you guys if you want a little bit of a break now, or my presentation won't take the whole hour. So we could also just do a break before. So whatever works better for the group schedule.
We can probably wait like maybe 10 minutes if that's okay with you, and then we'll come back.
If people need a bio break, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do you think we're good to go?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Nice. Okay. Hi, guys. I'm Leah Clucci. Like she said, I'm currently at Yale But I'm moving, actually. I'm having a baby in July, and then I'm moving to Vanderbilt. I'm leaving, but I'm happy to talk about the Northeast. I had a great time doing my training at Yale, and I'm very grateful to the institution. I just got a really cool opportunity I'll be working with Nissan Stadium, so I'll be staffing Vanderbilt football games and Tennessee Titans games. So it was just a too good to be true opportunity to turn down. But my involvement with AEM actually started 9 years ago now. I was a first year medical student. I wasn't even sure I was interested in emergency medicine, but I had this like little presentation thing that one of my mentors, she had done a research project and she was like, basically, can you present this somewhere? And AEM had a free conference for residents, because if you don't know this already, you should know when you're an AEM RSA member, our scientific assembly is free for students. You have to pay to travel there, but the registration cost is free. And so I was like, wow, like free symposium, let me go. And so I did, and I was like, wait a second, I really like these people. Maybe EM is for me. And then I got involved with AEM RSA at that time. I've held a lot of different roles. I've been on the board of AEM for 2 years. I served as the president of the AEM RSA for 2 years as well, and I'm still a member at large on their board. And so what really attracted me to this, and I don't know how much Katie had said in her presentation earlier, but I really aligned with the values of AEM because both my parents are ER nurses. And when I said I was going to go into emergency medicine, my parents were like, please, dear God, don't do this. And then when I said, no, this is really like my fit, they said, okay, then you're going to go in eyes wide open that EM has a lot of struggles and things that are not just unique to our specialty, things that are going on in every specialty, but they're like, if you're going to be a part of this, you're going to be a part of the solution and making a difference. And so some of the big things that I think are impacting emergency medicine, one of the number ones is this corporate practice of emergency medicine that I'm going to talk about to you guys today, as well as scope creep. And I think AEM has really, that's part of their values, that we believe in physician-led care. We don't use the term provider because we use the term doctor, and then non-physician or mid-level provider. We don't refer to doctors as providers. And so I think that when I was looking at all of the different groups, I really found that AEM was making a difference. And so I wanted to become a part of that. And they taught me a lot about what's going on in the specialty. So this is me giving back to teach you guys about some of that stuff. And I think Dr. Calhoun, when I was joining on, had mentioned to you guys a little bit about for-profit and looking at that in your residencies. You definitely want to be careful of looking at for-profit groups. And I'm going to list some of them here today, but definitely some things that you guys should be thinking about, because if they're for-profit, are they really thinking about your education? So I really appreciated that she had mentioned that. So the corporate practice of medicine is and we also talk about private equity. Both of these things are they're confusing at first when you first start exposing yourself to this. So if this is the first time that you guys are hearing about these things, that is okay. If some of this gets confusing or convoluted, please, I will drop my information in the chat too. I'm happy to talk to you about this. I'm very passionate about it. I've been learning about it for over a decade now. And so I am happy to be a resource for you. All of our AEM folks are happy to be a resource, but don't get worried if you're like, I don't understand any of this stuff today. That's okay. I will try to break it down as much as possible though, and I'm open to questions. One of the first things is, you guys might be surprised, is that when you go to get your first job as an emergency medicine attending, and that is one thing, I'm an attending at Yale right now, and I also work in the community. So I work at two small hospitals that are in small democratic groups. And so I'll talk about that too. That's a different type of staffing model. So I work both in academics, and then I work for a small democratic group. I don't work for any private equity groups. I'm not allowed to, because I do these presentations speaking about how bad private equity is. So I don't think they would ever want to hire me anyway. But when you're looking at those things, when you go to get your first job as an ER doctor, you might be surprised that you're actually not getting hired by the hospital. So like your surgeon colleagues, anesthesia, those folks oftentimes are getting hired directly by the hospital. You get hired by something called a contract management group, and we refer to those as CMGs. This is very unique to emergency medicine. Over 70% of ER doctors are hired by contract management group. And then a lot of those that aren't are hired, but the 30% that aren't are hired by academics. So they're hired by the medical school. So my academic job, I'm still not hired by Yale New Haven Hospital. I'm hired by Yale Medical School. So it's a very different kind of way of being staffed. And then the other like 10% of those are those like small democratic groups that are those are physician owned staffing groups. They still are staffing the hospital. You are not hired directly by the hospital. So these contract management groups are basically the hospital finds a contract team or finds a staffing group to staff their emergency department, and then they're the ones that hire the ER doctor. And so what's really confusing about that is then you don't get the same benefits as being a hospital employee because you're not hired by the hospital. You are hired by a third party. So that's just something to think about. And I'm going to talk about that into a little bit more detail. There are some other specialties that this is starting to happen to. So anesthesia, this has started to happen to. If when you guys do your rotation, sometimes in the ICU and stuff, you might find about like private doctors that aren't hired by the hospital. So there are some other specialties that this is happening to, but it's most pervasive in emergency medicine. And some examples of these CMGs, so that when you guys hear some of these names, you'll kind of think of them. Team Health, Envision Healthcare, Team Care, Schumacher, USACS, American Physician Partners, which recently went bankrupt. Envision also recently went bankrupt. And so these groups are these contract management groups. And so when you look back at who actually owns that staffing company, it's all of the Blackstone, BlackRock, KKR. So if you guys hear about in the news some of those crazy things that are happening with private equity groups and hear about BlackRock in the news and how BlackRock is bad, all that stuff, they're the ones that are actually owning healthcare. So in the United States. So that's something just to think about when you're looking at what is happening. That's what we refer to as private equity. And just to give you an example, so the Team Health CEO, Team Health is going to come up a couple times in here. So the Team Health, Steven Schwartzman, who also works with HCA, his 70th birthday party cost over $20 million. Gwen Stefani was there, camels were there, all these things. Yet his physicians and nursing staff at these hospitals were striking because sometimes they were getting paid less than minimum wage. So just to put that into perspective of this guy's out here having a huge $20 million birthday party. That's not even how much he's making a year, just how much he's willing to spend on an event, and is not willing to pay his staff a meaningful wage. And we'll go a little bit more into some of the Team Health shenanigans that have happened. So what actually is this? We have anti-corporate practice of medicine laws. There's 40 states in the United States that actually have laws on the book that say the corporate practice of medicine is bad and should not happen. And what that means is that's where they say a business cannot employ a physician. And this is to keep the business influence out of the patient-physician relationship. Unfortunately, even though in the 1940s, this is when these laws first started, when the US began enacting these laws, with the goal to ensure that like these medical decisions were made based on patient care, not by corporate profit, a lot of these states actually can't enforce them. So even though there's 40 states that have them, there are very few states that actually use their corporate practice of medicine laws to prevent corporate practice of medicine in their state. So there's not a single state in the United States that does not have one of these contract management groups or is not having some sort of influence in the corporate practice of medicine. There are a couple states that have recently started to enact some of their laws, and we are working really hard right now to get a federal law to be the anti-corporate practice of medicine. Right now it's state specific, and it's very hard to get that state to then actually file a lawsuit and actually get one of those companies out. And I'll talk about what AAEM is doing about that a little bit later. But one thing that is being used a lot in corporate practice of medicine is lawyers. So it is against the law, and there is not a single state where a law practice cannot be owned by a lawyer, by a non-lawyer. So in the United States, if you are a law group, you know that your law group is owned by a lawyer because that is a corporate practice of medicine law. However, that is not the case for almost all physician groups and most hospital systems. Most of them are not owned by physicians. There are actually quite a few states where there is a law saying physicians cannot own hospitals because they believe that there is a conflict of interest there, which makes no sense to me. How can you say it's not right for a lawyer to not own a law practice? That person should be a lawyer, that's their expertise. But doctors, oh, they're so corrupt, they cannot own hospitals. That's just mind baffling to me, because when you actually look at the data and see hospitals that are owned by physicians, they tend to do better, have better patient outcomes, and do better care because the people that are running them have taken an oath, right? There's, of course, bad doctors out there, but there's a lot more of us who actually care about the patient over the profit and run their hospital system very well. Businessmen and women are going into their profession for very different reasons than we are going to. They did not take an oath to patients. So they have a very different goal when they are running a hospital system. So just some things to think about that always made me think, oh my God, this is crazy. So understanding a little bit more. So why has the corporate practice of medicine created so many challenges and concerns that are affecting both our healthcare providers and our patients? And why is this so bad? So doctors believe that this compromises patient safety. You're doing cost-cutting measures, you're increasing administrative burdens that lead to understaffing. I'm sure you guys have all heard about nursing shortages. Even at the strikes that are happening in New York right now, I would argue that maybe the strikes wouldn't have happened if the nurses were being paid what they deserve and what they should be paid. So we're compromising patient safety by prioritizing profit over patient. We're eroding physician autonomy. So if we're telling physicians that they have to make medical decisions based on insurance status or patient like outcome or pay or what those things that are actually illegal, we're not supposed to think about those things as ER doctors. But if you're thinking about that and not treating patients based on your evidence-based medicine that you went to 4 years of medical school, 3 to 4 years of residency for, you're losing your physician autonomy. And that causes a lot of physicians to feel burnt out, which leads to the next one, burnout and job satisfaction. When you're being told you have to order this number of CT scans or see this number of patients per hour, people get burnt out because then they feel like a cog in the wheel. Increased administrative burden. Over 2/3 of my shift is actually spent writing notes and not seeing patients. And so that's something that is like definitely a frustrating time because physicians are having to do more things to meet metrics and to decrease the impact to the corporate policy, make more money, bill more than they are being told to spend time with their patients. And then it reduces the access to care. So as we do these cost-cutting measures, we decrease services to patients, we close hospitals, and so we cause even more of a decreased access to care for patients. And so doctors have a huge problem with this because doctors, our first duty is to the patient, while corporations, their first duty is to their shareholders. So their first duty when they're a corporate practice medicine, their business is to make money, to be a business, to then pay their shareholders. And we never took, as a physician, once you finish medical school, you take an oath that you are going to prioritize the patient. You don't take an oath that says, I'm going to prioritize this corporation's bottom line. And so does that allow you to practice evidence-based medicine? Does that force you to see profit over patients? And then how can you advocate for yourself if you have no due process? Do you guys know what due process is? Okay, let's talk about due process real quick. So due process is actually a constitutional right. So it is our 5th constitutional amendment, where it says it's a notice and opportunity to be heard. So it's a fundamental principle in the laws to protect the rights of the individual from unjust and arbitrary actions of the government. So examples of this is like your Miranda rights, the right to an attorney, or things that are due process, the right and opportunity to be heard. So when you have, most jobs are supposed to have due process in a job. You can't just come to work one day and find out your job no longer exists. Like you have to have a reason to be fired. However, remember before I said that these contract management groups, 70% of ER doctors are owned by them? In order to work at a contract management group, there is a clause in all of their forms. I've read them for team health and vision, so I can say I've physically read these contracts. You have to sign away your right to due process. So you have to say that you are giving up your right and your notice and opportunity to be heard. This is a loophole because hospitals can't do that. So if you're employed by the hospital, in order to receive Medicare or Medicaid reimbursement, they have to give the physician the right to due process. But remember that ER doctor is not an employee of the hospital. They're an employee of the contract management group. So what we see a lot for emergency medicine physicians, unfortunately, is when they speak up about something that's happening in their hospital system. COVID was a prime example of these things. And I have some examples of these folks later on. They come to work the next day and find out they don't have a job anymore. They're taken off the schedule. And when they say, why was I fired? Why was I taken off the schedule? They don't have to give them a reason. So they don't have to give them notice. They don't have to give them a reason. We're one of the only specialties where this is happening. And so this is, I'm sure other specialties are catching on and finding out, oh, if I can just fire my doctor at any time, great. We've been having difficulty getting laws to prevent this because there is an argument of if there's a bad doctor, we want to be able to fire a bad doctor. The problem is that the good doctors then can't speak up. about the bad doctors, and the good doctors can't speak up about what's happening to their patients for fear of their job. So you have these people that are working, being forced to work for profit in order to keep their job. And then if they don't do what that person who's in charge of them, who is not a physician, they lose their job. We did a survey. So Bob McNamara, who did this survey, is one of the founders of AEM. I don't know if Katie had mentioned this in her presentation initially. AEM was founded actually like literally at a pizza place on a napkin. And Bob was one of the people at that initial meeting. And so he did a survey of EM physicians in the country right now. 76% of EM doctors practicing in the US can be removed by a hospital administrator at any time. 75% of board certified EM physicians have felt financially exploited at some point during their career. 49% have considered leaving the field due to unfair business practices. And then 62% of them have this no due process that I was talking about. So how do these groups even make profit? Like why even, if you're a business person, why do you want to go into healthcare? So they do a few things. They increase their coding. So they inflate billing charges. They charge Medicare, Medicaid, and do a lot of fraud sometimes by charging the patients for things that they might not. I don't know if you guys have ever had a family member go to the hospital or have seen the actual bills. The breakdown of them are very unusual, the things that you get charged for. You basically get charged for every single pillow that you have in the hospital. And it's crazy, the things that you get charged. And sometimes you'll get charged for things that never happened. So like when my mom went to the hospital, she got charged for an endocrine consult. So I fought it because I was like, there's nobody from any endocrine team that ever came to talk to my mom. The reason that they said that is because she had her blood glucose checked at one point in time during her hospital stay. So they said that was an endocrine consult. And I was like, no endocrinologist came. Nobody from an endocrine team talked to her. She wasn't dealing with diabetes. So this is not something but it takes a long time to fight that. And I'm a doctor fighting this for my family member. Imagine most of our patients are not doctors. Most of our patients don't understand these bills, don't understand how to even fight them, are scared to fight back. And so this is one of the ways that they inflate these charges. The number one expense to these groups, these staffing companies, are their physicians. So what do? They cut the physicians out as much as possible. They understaff them as much as possible. They tell their physicians to see more patients per hour, chart more. We won't pay you for charting. So just you have to be seeing patients up until the last minute of your shift, chart on your own time. They replace them with non-physicians. There are a lot of emergency departments in this country right now that actually have no physician on staff. So if you go to the emergency department for your emergency, you will maybe be seen by a nurse practitioner or a PA. And that is a total disservice to our patients. People say, oh, there's the physician shortage in rural. I would argue that is not true. As someone who has been helping people the last few years try to find jobs and to apply in some of these rural areas, that is not necessarily the case. A lot of these places are just not hiring because they don't want to hire a EM doc that's going to cost them more than another PA. And I feel very passionately about this, that it doesn't matter where you live in this country, no matter how rural you are, or if you're in a big urban city, patients deserve to be seen by a physician. If they are going to an emergency department, they should not be forced to be seen by a mid-level. And I kind of put this chart here because I think it's very interesting that if you look closely, a pet groomer actually has more clinical hands-on training than a nurse practitioner does before getting independent practice. So that just lays it out for you what the different levels are. So an attending physician, 21,000 hours, and a nurse practitioner, 500. So that just, and a lot of these clinical hours have actually moved to be online after COVID. And then they do a lot of things too, where they say, oh, you're a new grad who really needs a job. I'm going to pay you way less than what you deserve. And I saw this a lot with my friends this year who were trying to get jobs places that were shady places where they were told, you're coming out of residency and you have a bunch of debt and you're just excited to get paid anything. And I've had some of my friends that were like ready to sign a contract that I was like, whoa, do not sign that contract. That contract is totally inappropriate. You're not getting paid what you deserve. But they didn't know better because they just came from a resident salary. So to them, $150 an hour, that sounds great. That's not what you deserve as a physician. Fee splitting, I won't go too much into fee splitting, but one of the things to know about this is there is a law that emergency physicians should be allowed to ask what is billed and paid for in their name. So I should be able to say, Miss Mary, I want to know what actually she got charged for her visit because I only did an EKG on her and nothing else. And then I should be able to see all of the things that they got charged, which is oftentimes way more than what actually happened to that person in the emergency department. However, even though that is a law and physicians are supposed to ask that, we have plenty of examples of when physicians have asked to see the bills of their patients or to see what was billed in their name, saying Dr. Colucci charged Miss Mary for X, Y, and Z, that then when they don't have that due process, they lose their jobs. So that's been a huge thing where it's been like, and that's what's an added layer to that is say Miss Mary says, this is fraud. My Medicare has been charged fraudulently. If she goes and fights that and the CMG, that contract management group, has been found to do something fraudulent, your name is also in it. So you are also accused of being liable and responsible for what that patient was charged for, even though you never knew what they were charged for. So that's what this whole like fee splitting thing happens. And we're fighting against that. Okay. So all the stuff that I said is really bad, right? Everything's like awful. However, AEM is doing a lot for this. So this is a great example. Minglin is he was a very distinguished emergency medicine physician. He had been working for over 30 years at the same hospital that was a Team Health site. Team Health is the one that I talked about earlier where they had that $20 million birthday party. He had never had any patient or nursing complaint about him, about negative bad care in over 30 years. He was loved by the staff. He was loved by his patients. He was an outstanding physician. He had never had any sort of negative problems in his 30 plus career. So during COVID, he noticed that his nursing staff was not being given the same PPE that other people were. And so he went to the hospital and he said, not for himself, not even for other physicians. He went for the nursing staff and said, hey, we need enhanced safety measures. And he actually went to some other hospitals and asked about their protocols and what they were doing for their nursing staff and came to his hospital system and said, look, this is what other hospitals in the area are doing. This is what we should be and could be doing for our nursing staff. Let's protect them on the front line. And he advocated for that. And he was fired. He was let go. They wouldn't tell him why. And he fought it. And when he went to fight it, Team Health wanted to settle with him. And they wanted to just give him a substantial settlement, give him millions of dollars essentially to say, keep your mouth shut. We let you go. Just walk away. And he famously said, my silence is not for sale. And I'm going to make sure everybody knows about this. And so because of that, he then has been wrapped up in a lot of other unfortunate litigation since that. AEM has been backing him and supporting him. This has been now 5 years of him fighting this group essentially to expose them for what they're doing and to try to make things better for physicians that will come after him. And he could have taken that settlement and no one would have blamed him because he fought the first time, he lost his job unfairly, he deserved this settlement, but he wasn't willing to do that because he didn't want this to continue to happen to other physicians. And so he is a prominent AEM member. We are helping support him in this fight financially. This is something that if you have anybody who wants to donate, you guys are medical students, you should not be donating to any of this stuff. But this is one of the things that your membership dues does go to. But if you have anybody that wants to donate, they can donate actually directly to this cause for Minglin. And I think he will be in Seattle too. He's a wonderful person to speak to and hear more about what's going on. Non-competes, do you guys understand what non-competes are? Non-competes are basically, this is more important for surgeons. So basically, if you work at, like in Connecticut, we have 2 hospital systems, Yale Healthcare and Hartford Healthcare. So if you work at Yale, for example, as a surgeon, it would be inappropriate for you to the next day go to Hartford Healthcare and take all of your patients with you because those patients have been patients of the Yale system. So you sign a non-compete because these are patients that you've been seeing for like years, saying that there's a period of time when you're transferring systems to not just walk away with a bunch of patient data and all of this stuff. That makes sense for like family medicine folks who have their patients can be taking care of that patient from the time they're 20 to the time they're 50. That makes sense when you're seeing the same patient for years. It does not make sense for ER doctors whose patients don't go with them. Granted, there are plenty of frequent flyers that I see almost every night that I work. However, I would really like when I go up the street to a different hospital to not see that same patient again. So I don't control who comes to see me. They don't pick me as their doctor when they come to see me in the emergency department. It makes no sense to have an ER doctor under a non-compete because we don't take our patients with us. We don't have any patient information to take with us. However, these contract management groups put non-competes in because if they own a lot of hospitals in that same system, it can force doctors out. So it keeps you bound to that hospital system. So for example, we had someone in the state of Mississippi who said, I'm walking away from this contract group. I don't want to be a part of this group anymore. They are telling me to order things that I don't think are appropriate on patients. They had to leave the entire state of Mississippi because of a non-compete that was in their contract. And think of how detrimental that is to that community because it's a rural community that needs physicians. And now they just lost a physician to the entire state because of a non-compete that this contract management group put in. And they put it in to try to keep that doctor from leaving. So that's just one thing to think about. It doesn't make any sense to have an ER doctor have a non-compete. What is AEM doing about all of this? And why is this the group to be a part of? And as much as I like a lot of this presentation is, oh my God, the sky is falling. I don't want you guys to take away from that. I want you to be inspired by this because I want you to say, because this is not just EM that this is happening to. There are other things that doesn't matter where you go, you will have to deal with private equity. So if you're going to, I'm going to tell you the same thing my parents told me is that I am so happy I'm an emergency physician. I would choose the specialty every day. I'm proud to be an emergency physician. I love going to work. I love my job. And I hope to be doing this until the day they tell me you got to retire. But if you're going to be a part of this, don't be someone that just checks in and out of work. Actually be a part of change and making a difference because overall that's going to be what's better for your patients and that's going to be better for the doctors that come after you and that's going to be better for our entire US healthcare system. So be a part of that change and AEM is part of that change. So this just being a member of AEM, you're making a difference. So what are all the things AEM is doing? England, we just talked about. So the FTC and the Workforce and Mobility Act. So this is something that we are fighting these non-competes. So we actually went to the Federal Trade Commission. We were the only group, AEM was the only group out of all doctors in the United States that was invited to speak to the Federal Trade Commission about non-competes. And so we actually got them to put this in a clause that said that non-competes will not apply for emergency medicine physicians. I'll talk about that a little bit more later because that was a big win for us. There's a lot of lawsuits that are happening about it, but we'll mention that a little bit more. But we were calling that the Workforce Mobility Act. And the Workforce Mobility Act was to allow physicians to move among different hospitals within their same system or within the same state and release them from non-competes. We're working on the Envision lawsuit. I'll go into more details of the Envision lawsuit in another slide. We have due process legislation. So we have something called the Patient and Physician Safety Act. Talk about that in a little bit. And then the federal corporate practice of medicine legislation. So we are introducing the corporate practice of medicine legislation right now. And we have both bipartisan support. So we have both Republicans and Democrats saying that this is wrong. And regardless of political opinions or what anybody believes in, I don't want to get into details of what people are for or against, but this is a good time for us to be trying to present some of these things because if anybody read Hillbilly Elegy and has read about J.D. Vance's life and some of the things that he had to deal with growing up in the healthcare system, regardless of who he is now as a person, he does understand some of the non-competes and some of the utilizing of the emergency health services. And so he has been actually a proponent of wanting to protect EM physicians more and wanting to release them from non-competes and to get the government out of healthcare more. This is a good time for us to capitalize on it, even if there's other terrible, bad things going on. So founding of AEM, I'm sure Katie went over some of this stuff before, but basically we were founded because we were fighting for EM to be practiced by a board certified EM physician, and we were against the corporate practice of medicine. And we recently had a group of our AEM members found a group called Take Medicine Back that includes not just EM doctors, but all specialties. So everyone that's being impacted by the CPOM to help them fight. And if any of you guys are interested in getting involved in this group too, I'm happy to connect you. And this group, the Take Medicine Back group, has been helping people strike. So actually helping EM physicians strike in a way that is safe for patients, but also that is helping them get the things that they need at their institutions. Okay, so the Envision lawsuit. So this is a prime example of a way that AAEM is fighting back in a big way. And I only have good news about it. We won. But basically, the Envision lawsuit is, has anybody heard of the group Envision? So Envision is one of the, yeah, so it's a big one and more on the West Coast. They were very pervasive all throughout California. But they are one of these contract management groups. They are owned by, I believe, KKR. And they were basically, they were making these hiring and firing decisions. They were doing the same things that I was talking about before, where they were just like firing doctors. They were doing things fishy though, where they weren't just firing them. They were doing things where they'd say, oh, you know what? You are not going to be working for the next 3 months. We didn't schedule you, and you only get paid for the shifts that you work. So they wouldn't outright fire people. They would do fishy things like that, where you would just suddenly find out that you have no salary for the next 3 months. Like, most people in this country cannot live that way. They would tell you how many patients that you'd see. So they'd say, oh, you're not seeing enough patients per hour. You need to see 5, 6, 7 patients per hour in order to actually get your pay. And then they would do things like they'd tell you, oh, you know what? If your patient has this type of insurance, order a CT scan on them because we actually get reimbursed. But if that patient doesn't have this type of insurance, don't order a CT scan on them. We don't care what your worries are. We don't care if you think they're having a brain bleed. We don't care if you think they're bowel obstructed. Don't order a CT on that person because we're not going to get reimbursed for it, which is horrible. As an ER doctor, I don't know if you guys have done a lot of your EM rotations yet, but I don't look at what my patient's insurance is. A lot of EMRs actually will prevent you from even knowing what the patient's insurance is unless it's actually going to impact like who you're going to refer them to after. But I never look at what my patient's insurance status is because that should never factor into your brain. It should always be, I'm ordering this CT scan because I have a medical reason for it, or I'm ordering this because I have a medical reason for it, not because I hope that I'm going to get reimbursed for this. 60 Minutes did a segment on this when we were going through this. So this is a great 60 minutes segment to watch that goes a lot more into detail of a lot of the things that I'm talking about now. And so what happened in the Envision lawsuit is AEM had a contract with this hospital that was owned by Envision and was being managed by Envision. And so we said, hey, you are harming AEM physicians because you are forcing them to do unethical things. And so we sued them. And Envision said, no, we're not doing any of this. We're going to put you through the ringer. It was a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. And they tried to bring in all of this extra documentation. They were threatening doctors that were working there to not cooperate with us and to provide us evidence and talk to AEM. They were doing all of these different things. And so they really went into this thinking that they would win. And California, this was happening in the state of California. California has really strong corporate practice of medicine laws. They're one of those 40 states that has laws, but they have some of the strongest laws in the country that says this practice is bad. And so they were realizing after over a year that maybe AEM was going to win. So they said, you know what, we're going to file bankruptcy. And so they went to the judge and they said, Judge, listen, we're bankrupt. We can't go through this lawsuit anymore. You should just let us settle. And the judge said, no, because they were seeing a lot of evidence that it supported AEM's claims that some badness was happening. And so they said, no, we're going to continue on with this lawsuit. The overall thing that happened is we were found to be right that AEM exposed all these horrible things that Envision was doing. And the Attorney General of the state of California got involved with this. And they said Envision is no longer allowed to work in the state of California. They had to totally close their doors. They had to say they were no longer employing physicians in the state of California. They had to move entirely out of the state. And they had to then, all of those physicians that they were employing, they had to still cover their medical malpractice. So they couldn't leave them with no coverage. And they had to release them from all non-competes. So all of these physicians that had been employed by this Envision group then were allowed to get jobs wherever they wanted to or stay at their own hospital after and not have to worry about having to leave the state or their city or anything like that to continue working. So that was a big win. However, Envision is still a group at many other places in this country. They just no longer are in California. So our goal is basically now is to go state by state and keep kicking them out, because now that we have this happen in California, we can emphasize what that look, California has strong CPOM laws. We can try to protect more of our California docs. And so if we keep going throughout that through the United States, we can hopefully get our claws into more places and win more. Also, if we get a federal CPOM, like anti-CPOM law, then we don't have to worry about what the individual states say. We can also have a federal, the United States doesn't believe in us. I talked to you guys about how we went to the Federal Trade Commission and said that non-competes are bad. There's been 3 lawsuits against it so far, one in Texas, actually, sorry, 2 in Texas and 1 in Pennsylvania, and basically saying allowing EM physicians out of non-competes is, they said these groups are saying that's wrong and they still want to have the non-competes. Ultimately, it's still in litigation of trying to figure out who's right, but right now the FTC is still saying that EM doctors should not be held to non-competes. There are still some groups and some states that are doing it. So when you're signing your contract, you should be aware of that. But there's some, so like I'm moving to Tennessee right now. Like I told you guys, I'll be starting Tennessee. So the state of Tennessee does not allow non-competes. So I can be working at Vanderbilt and I'm allowed to get a job right up the road, and Vanderbilt can't do anything about it. While the state of Connecticut does have non-compete laws, which is a little bit difficult to navigate. So it really doesn't have anything to do with what my healthcare system says. It has to do with what the state says. That's something that we're trying to navigate. And then some other federal laws. So I told you guys that we have the due process legislation happening right now. This is called the Physician and Patient Safety Act. This is to protect not just EM physicians, but all physicians in this country, to give them the right to due process, that constitutional right that I talked about earlier. And we have support from Warren, Marshall, Ruiz, and Joyce on this right now. Again, bipartisan, bicameral support, because this is not a Republican versus Democrat thing. This is what is best for patients and what is best for physicians in this country. And we've actually had the Department of Homeland Security, Senator Gary Peters has been looking into the corporate practice of medicine and like how it's impacting, because specifically the Department of Homeland Security is interested because of what happened during COVID, where EM doctors were the heroes during COVID, right? EM doctors were also being fired a lot during COVID for speaking up. Other things that we're doing. So you guys heard I'm at the ACGME right now. The ACGME is the governing body that approves all residency groups. So as you guys heard, there is a lot of residency groups that are for profit. So I'm on the board of the ACGME. And so we can't make rules at the ACGME saying no private equity, because there's a law called the Sherman Antitrust Act. But we can do things that like improve the standard of education. So making sure that it doesn't matter where you are in this country, where you get matched for residency, but that we will ensure that you're getting a good education. So that's something that the ACGME can do. And then there's different committees that some of us are a part of. I leave a committee that's looking at the impact on resident education of PAs and NPs, so the non-physicians in their training. So when residents say, hey, I'm not getting enough procedures because the PA keeps taking all of it, that's something that I can help influence and do something about. And then the AMA. So we are also very involved in the American Medical Association. AEM has its own group that goes there. So they have 6 people that they send there, and we write resolutions. So we're writing a resolution among the AMA right now on the corporate practice of medicine, so that we can have the American Medical Association publicly come out saying, we don't agree with private equity. It's hard because there is still a lot of private equity influence among the AMA, but that's one thing that we're working on. And then we just offered a resolution 226 that didn't get passed, but we're still working on it. That says if you're using the term emergency department, you have to have a physician on staff. So you can't be one of those ERs that don't have any physicians, that you're only staffing with nurse practitioners or PAs. And because it's misleading to patients who think they're going to the emergency department for emergency care. And most of this stuff can all be found on our website. And then Bob McNamara and Mark Ryder did a similar presentation when we were in Rhodes, Greece. I'm happy to talk to you guys more about it too, because I know I went into a lot of detail quickly about some really convoluted, tricky topics. Even if I can't answer all the questions today, happy to talk offline.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Kalushi?
And don't be scared. EM is still the best specialty in the world. I just want you guys exposed to the things. Ortho actually is a prime example right now that's being severely impacted by CPOM, and they have created a coalition. The orthopedic surgeons have created a coalition to start trying to fight against the corporate practice of medicine as well. So they're becoming our allies in some areas. So it's certainly not just EM, it's just we've been putting up the fight the longest.
And I think it's so important because I feel like throughout medical school and even probably through residency as well, we're not talked about anything financial. We're not talking about anything about contracts, different contracts when we come out of residency. So I think it's super important to get the ball rolling on what to look for when we are looking for residencies or when we're looking for jobs as an attending as well. We're so like embedded in the education that sometimes we're so lost in the financial. I think it's super important that we're powerful educationally wise, but I think it's also very beneficial that we're powerful financially and that we have a say for our patients as well as for ourselves.
Exactly. And one thing that we don't talk about, because most residencies are at like academic sites, right? So a lot of residency programs aren't teaching their residents about this. My residency program, certainly, like I love Yale. I'm there. I do didactics for the residents. We certainly don't talk about this much with the residents. And because they're like, this doesn't necessarily happen as much in academics. So a lot of my co-attendings are very sheltered by this, or sheltered from this, and which is great. They have it's a great place to work. They're very protected, but they can't give advice on looking at contracts, which is the most people are going to wind up working in the community. And so that's why there's this weirdness sometimes in talking about like how much you're going to get paid, how much your benefits are when you're talking about contracts. And I'm very open about it because I think that we should be talking about it. You should talk to your co-attendings in the department because you should be like, wait, why is this person getting paid more than me? Or how did this person negotiate this in their salary? Because if we're not open about these things, that's how these groups get away with badness because they take advantage of you not knowing. So that's one of my friends. This was happening to her. She wanted to live in a very specific area. She was going to take any contract that she was given. And a lot of these things were written into her contract that were just bad things. And I was like, do not sign that. And she's, but I'm going to be making so much more than I am as a resident right now. I'm like, yeah, you're making an attending salary. You should be, but you also need all these other protections and you need to think about your medical malpractice and all these things that you don't think about as a resident. And you guys don't have to think about this when you're matching for residency.
Yeah, like even now throughout my interview trail, I hear like a lot of residents, even like first and second years, they're like getting contracts already. I texted to them and it's super enticing when you're making $70,000 and someone offers you this crazy sign-on bonus in this great city, but it's the fine print that you're talking about that kind of makes a difference. If you just continue to go into that vicious cycle, it's just never going to end and you're going to be in a bad situation.
And it's really smart of these contract management groups to try to scoop someone as a PGY2. You have an extra year or two of training. We're going to scoop you. We're going to have you sign this contract. You already have your job. You're not going to look anywhere else. And then now we can keep you at the level of what the market was offering 2, 3 years prior to you ever working instead of paying you what the market is offering you now.
Exactly. I do have a quick question because I feel like locums are coming like a more popular route from people. So how does that incorporate into the private equity? How can we like do locums if you want to do locums without contributing to that bad habit from those private equity companies?
So locums is certainly an option. I have a lot of friends that get a lot of joy out of locums. There's good and bad about it because it's hard traveling or being having to be sometimes away from your family. But when you're locums, you have numerous contracts. So even if you have a contract with one of these terrible groups, and even if those shifts are hard here and there, you can walk away from them at any time and still have these other contracts. So you're protected because say that group says, tomorrow we've cut all of your shifts for the next 2 months. Okay, you still have contracts with other groups because you're doing locums. So you have more autonomy to speak up and protect yourself because you have more than one contract. You're not relying on only one source of your income. So locums is a great way that physicians have been fighting back, which has been good. But there's then the downsides of it of you might not get the same amount of benefits like healthcare benefits because you're a different type of 1099 employee versus a W-2 employee. Oh, Safi, sorry if I said her name wrong. It's locums is basically where you are a traveling doctor, essentially like how traveling nurses are, where you have multiple contracts at different hospitals. And so I have friends that live in Texas, but they'll spend 2 weeks in New York and a week in Seattle. And so they'll just like work like 5 or 6 shifts in a different state for a week to kind of coverage if that hospital like had someone out because they're sick or something along those lines. And so they'll pop in, work there for a little bit, and then come back. So it's basically, think of it as like a traveling doctor, is their locums. And then Carrie Ann. Yeah. Are there signs that residents are being prepared to advocate for themselves and their patients long term? You can ask the residents. Don't be afraid. You guys, when you are the med students interviewing places, you are in more of a position of power. So don't ask in a condescending, mean, or aggressive way. But you can ask the residents, and most residents are going to be honest with you because they want you to actually, they want you to be happy. We don't get any benefit of you matching in a place that you're unhappy at. So like most residents want you to be happy. So they'll tell you if they're getting any sort of advocacy experience or if they're getting conversations about this. So like, for example, if you ask a Yale resident, like they definitely get a lot of patient advocacy conversations around it. They might not necessarily get a lot of talks about some of this more in-depth stuff that I talked about here, unless they're like seeking those sorts of things out. But yeah, you definitely should ask them if they feel like their attendings ever are forced to do things that aren't in the best patient interest, things along those lines. No one's going to be mad at you for asking those questions. I also, as someone who's currently pregnant, you should ask, even if you're not pregnant, even if you don't know that you will ever start a family, ask about maternity and paternity leaves, because if they're going to ding you for asking that question, that's not a place that you'd want to be at anyway. And the way that they treat their parents that are going to be going on maternity, paternity leave could be how they'll treat you if you ever get sick or anything along those lines. So I am very happy that I asked about that on the trails, and it's only been a great time for me and for my other co-residents and fellows and attendings that have had babies during training.
Thank you, Dr. Colucci.